Welcome to the Next Level Casino Careers Show, a series highlighting industry tips and insights from the best minds in the casino and hospitality industry. Enjoy the show.
Hector Fernandez, welcome to the show. Appreciate you spending some time with us today.
Thank you for having me, Kyle. Really appreciate it.
So for those of you who don't know, I'm sure you do, Hector is the CEO of Aristocrat Gaming. Hector, you've got quite the bio, but just to give folks a little more context who are listening or watching today, if you wouldn't mind, just give us your 3 to 4 minute backstory, as I like to call it, your origin story, where you grew up, kind of what got you your career interests, and then ultimately what you do today.
Sure. So Hector Fernandez, I am, like you said, Kyle, the CEO of gaming. I come from very humble beginnings. I was born in Guatemala. My parents immigrated to the U.S. when I was about a year old. I grew up in East LA. So for those of you that are familiar with California, East LA is not the greatest place in the world. But I was very fortunate. I went to the public school there, and in third grade, the principal actually connected my mom to a scholarship program where I was very fortunate to attend a very prestigious private school in Pasadena. The challenge, though, was I had to take 3 public buses to get there. So, starting in 4th grade at a very young age, I learned a lot about work ethic, sacrifices, the things that you have to do to differentiate in life. So I was very fortunate. I think also at a young age, I learned that the world isn't necessarily fair, and there's a lot of discrepancies in access. So obviously all my friends had designer shoes, designer clothes, and my mom shopped at Payless for me for shoes. And so that was one of the key learning moments for me in my life. And quite frankly, what really drove my ambition and my motivation going forward. After high school, I got to go to a very nice private high school as well. I went to Claremont McKenna, small liberal arts school, very close to actually Yamava. I was an econ major, and I minored in accounting and government. After CMC, I took a job at Deloitte. So I started off my career in public accounting. Great place to start your career because you get a lot of access to information, access to other much higher level executives. And for the most part, they don't love that you're coming to talk to them because you're asking about, you're auditing their financials. But so that gave me a skill set at a very young age to feel comfortable really around people that were much more senior than I was. After about 3 years at Deloitte, I decided that I wanted to spend my time more in the present and future versus the past. But I didn't really know how to make a career pivot. And so I did what any young person does when they're not sure. I went back to grad school. So I went to USC, got an MBA. I got a concentration in marketing and finance. And then after that, I joined Procter & Gamble in Cincinnati. It was a really big move for me because I'd never lived anywhere outside of California. But I realized that having geographic flexibility in your career is critical to success, because there's a lot of folks out there that are unwilling to move from, the 10, 30-mile radius they grew up, and that can limit your career options. I worked at P&G in a global role, so every 3 weeks or so I would travel internationally. That was my first global experience, which was fantastic because you get to learn a lot about different cultures, different languages, different ways of doing business. After about 3 years at P&G, and as my wife and I kind of joke, 3 winters, we decided that was a really tough thing to adjust to, and we really hadn't adjusted to it. So we moved back to California, where I worked at Amgen, a large biotech, and I did a variety of roles there. But the last 3-4 years there, I really spent time with the commercial organization, and really got to know how world-class commercial organization runs. All of the different things like marketing strategy, sales, pricing. I was very fortunate that I got a lot of exposure to that. After that, my boss at Amgen became the CFO of Western Digital. So he called and said, hey, you want to join me? So that's the other thing I would say from a career perspective. You tend to build connections and relationships, and it's really important to follow some of those folks around because it really helps in career trajectory. So I went to Western Digital. I was the CFO of a business unit there. And the last year and a half or so, I had left finance for the first time in my career, which is another important thing from a career perspective, being able to be flexible and pivot. and I was running a $4 billion global distribution business, which was a really, really big change from anything I had done. And then I got a call from an executive recruiter, and there was this company in Las Vegas called Aristocrat, which quite frankly, I never had heard of the company. I'd never been in gaming before. I had always said Las Vegas was always a fun place to visit, but definitely not a place I would ever live or raise a family. But I came to Las Vegas with a very open mind and met the team. And very quickly, I realized that Aristocrat was much more than a gaming company, and just everything that they were trying to do and build upon. I really felt like I could help. So I joined Aristocrat in November of 2018 as the CFO of the Americas. About 7 months later, they offered me the role of president of the Americas. So again, leaving finance and running the Americas business. And a couple of months ago, they offered me the role of CEO of gaming. And so, about a little bit over 2 months in the role, now I'm responsible for global gaming across all the jurisdictions that we operate in. And it's been a fantastic role so far.
Hector, you provided so much good stuff there. I took so many notes. So before I jump into kind of my next question, I want to touch on a couple of things you said there. And one of them is, because you talked about pivots. And I think something that's really helpful for people watching or listening is that conversation, because you talked about you have to be able to move, or, you switched industries, or you went back to school. For those who have a family or are in a serious relationship, any tips on kind of that approach as someone who's done it sounds like several times, just, how any tips on what's that conversation or that thought process, anything there?
Sure. I think the first thing to acknowledge is that everyone is terrified of change. So human beings, just as a general principle, are creatures of habit. So any change, whether it's career, location, industries, is terrifying. And the uncertainty of it is very terrifying. So I think acknowledging that and feeling comfortable that it will make you very uncomfortable is step one. I think step two is really understanding the opportunity. You never want to run away from somewhere. Something I learned a long time ago, because I think a lot of people will get frustrated in their current position and they're running away from their current position. And anytime you do that, what you find is when you get into your new position, you're equally just unhappy because it's probably something that you need to change or evolve or work on yourself. So that's the other piece. Don't run away from something. Make sure you're running towards something. And then the third thing I would say is embrace the challenge. The only way we grow as individuals, as people, as humans, is by feeling incredibly uncomfortable and challenging ourselves to do different things. I also would say that having the support of your significant other is vital in success. One of the things I tell people that work for me or that are thinking of working for me is I always ask about their family, and I always ask about how their family feels about a move or a change. Because ultimately, Kyle, if your family is not behind you and supportive, it's very difficult to be successful. And I have this concept of the next 12 hours. And I do feel in corporate America, sometimes we don't spend enough time talking about it. But the concept of the next 12 hours is when you go home, which is the next 12 hours post-work, does that fill your cup or does that drain your cup? And if you're in a position that it fills your cup, when you show up the next day to the first 12 hours, you realize that you can give a lot more to an organization, to your people, to build a culture. And so having your family, having that support system that understands your career aspirations and that are aligned to building that with you is critical to success.
Absolutely. One of the things I think I shared, I think it was Jeff Bezos or someone who does a speech on work-life harmony, and it's kind of similar, right? It does your work give you energy? And then the same side, at home, I like that the next 12 hours, it's the same way. And if one's off, then it's going to definitely affect the other. So I love that take on it. Another thing that you said, as far as just your upbringing, is you knew you had to differentiate yourself in life. And then later on in your career, you did. It sounds like you had a background generally in accounting, finance, kind of that was your bread and butter. That was your staple, your foundation. And then you moved on over, if I read right, MBA in marketing and finance. So as you kind of progressed in your career, Where did that stem from? It sounded to stem from earlier. You needed to differentiate yourself, but a lot of times people get pigeonholed. Like, I am the advertising guy. I am the finance woman. I am this person. I guess two-part question. Like, how did you know that? Like, I need to add to my skill set. And then two, just kind of that decision, because I'm sure that was uncomfortable, jumping more into marketing and learning to do that. So kind of speak to that if you could.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all pick careers, and in a lot of ways, there is some thought that goes into it, but a lot of it is circumstance and luck, right? The way I picked a career, when I went to college, I wanted to be a doctor. That was kind of my thinking. And so I went in as a pre-med student. And then, but I wanted to understand the financial element of it. And at the time, the U.S. healthcare system was going through a lot of change with HMOs and private insurance. And so even the economics of compensation and what doctors make and practices and all of that were starting to change. And so I decided I was going to take some econ classes. And then as a result of that, I took an accounting class. And I remember I had a professor, Professor Masood, who really talked about how accounting was the language of business. And in order to be successful in business, you need to understand the accounting behind it. And that's just how I decided to minor in accounting, and why I decided to start my career in public accounting. So it was kind of more luck than anything else. Like, I was going to be a doctor. And then in college, I decided that that's not a profession I was going to pursue anymore. Not that there's anything wrong with that profession, but just given my, my skills and the things I was interested in. I think one of the things that people sometimes forget, and it's hard when you have a very demanding job, is this concept of intellectual curiosity. I've always been a curious person just by nature. When I was a child, I think, it would drive my poor mom insane because I was always asking why. And I was always taking things apart, but never able to put them back together. So I would take whatever toy I had and I would take it apart, and then I'd, be upset because I couldn't put it back together. But this concept of intellectual curiosity and this lifelong pursuit of learning is two really important concepts, because one of the things you realize is that the second you stop learning, particularly if you're a very curious person, you get bored. And the second you get bored, you actually stop performing. And so it's, for me, it's always been this intellectual curiosity and really understanding the whys behind things that has made me open to change. I will tell you, and I've, Tommy, who I work with a lot very closely, he always says I'm the best sales accountant that he's ever met, because accountants by their nature, the stereotype is that they're not good salespeople, right? They're more back of the office, not in front of customer facing. And Tommy was shocked by my ability to, to talk to customers, to sell the concept, the product, the idea. And quite frankly, Kyle, in the beginning, I was too, because it wasn't a skill that I had spent a whole lot of time developing. And so I think that's the key. When people think about their career, there is no such thing as a typical career path. There is no such thing as, hey, I need to do this job, then this job, then this job, then ultimately I get here. I think the important thing to do, instead of figuring out the steps, try to figure out what the end point looks like for you. And the end point is really important. Doesn't mean that it's anchored forever, but it gives you an element of where do you see yourself. And I always ask people this question: picture the day you're retiring, and now work backwards. Tell me about where you are that day, and work backwards kind of from your career. I think it's really powerful. So for me personally, I had said when I was in my early 20s, I want to be the CFO of, a large publicly traded company. That was my anchor point. And so my career, as I was working through, and then the other thing I did was I was fortunate that I would have access to some public CFOs that I could go pick their brain and say, hey, how did you get here? And what you find is that every journey is a bit different. And so that was my anchor point. And then as I was going through my career, I've made these pivots that we talked about, and having the flexibility to have your anchor point change is critical. Is so critical. And I think a lot of times people forget that, because as you grow and you mature and you have access to different experiences, your interests may actually change. And that's okay. And so having the ability to pivot your anchor point is incredibly important, to embrace new opportunities, even though from a career perspective, people view it almost like a staircase, if you will. But sometimes you have to take roles that are either laterals, and sometimes they may even be a step behind to where the trajectory that you were headed, so you can ultimately get to what your final destination is. And look, one of the things I would also tell folks is make sure you enjoy the journey, because I think it is very easy to get stuck in, hey, this is where I'm trying to get to, and get stuck in this idea of the destination. And you wake up one day and you realize, hey, I missed the whole journey to kind of that led me there.
Wow, there's just, Hector, you're making my job so easy today. I mean, you're giving just so many nuggets where I just want to give some commentary to some of the things that I wrote down. So one thing I took from that is start with the end in mind, essentially, right? But I think what you hit on was key, which is that end point can change, and you can change your mind. And I think we all grow up with this notion that changing your mind is a weakness, when actually it's a strength, through humility, whether that's your career and just looking yourself in the mirror and said, that's what I thought I wanted, but it's not, and it's okay. But at the same point, to have enough balance, as you spoke about earlier, to make sure you gave the position a try, or that opportunity to try, to the best of your ability. And if it's time to switch, then it's time to switch. Enjoy the journey. I love that you hit on that. I have kids now, and there's a couple things I wrote down that you were speaking of. And one of them, it's a quote. I can't remember who or what it comes from, but it's real simple. It's, one day I won't be able to do this. Today is not that day. Meaning one day I'm either going to be dead, I'm going to be not able to, or I'm just going to be a different phase in life where some of the things that I think are hard, I'm going to probably beg for and wish I could do. So I think that perspective of enjoying the journey is huge. And then the last one I kind of want to talk to, which you spoke about, is curiosity. Once again, just now that I have young kids, we watch Sesame Street. And I don't know if you're familiar, but one of the things they commonly say throughout the episodes is, I wonder, what if, let's try. And that's what's important. And that's a piece that was missing that I'm trying to get better at. It's a great thing to be curious, right? Because that'll fuel you, that'll feed you. But without action, that curiosity is wasted. So I love, like Sesame Street as an example. Like, it's not just I wonder, it's what if, what's the execution plan behind that curiosity, and let's try. So I mean, you said so many things there. And then one last thing before we jump into some other questions. I think this is key. Having a foundation, it doesn't need to be your expertise, but having a foundation in financial literacy and accounting is so crucial. If I was to start my journey all over again, I would probably start there a little more. I'm playing catch up now, working in the leadership office here and putting together presentations. So I'm learning by doing, which is ultimately kind of how I learn. But it's never going to be like my superpower. But you definitely need to have a foundation there. And I love that you knew that ahead of time. And to be able to, not only that, and then something I've realized too, is be able to communicate it. I think a lot of times with analysts and finance people, what falls short is, I've heard this expression. A lot of times people could tell you how the clock works or how the watch works, but what leadership's looking for is what time it is.
Right.
And I think that's what gets missed. And I think that's probably why you're the CEO, is because you've been able to bridge the two.
Yeah, going back to the curiosity piece, I think there's such important learnings in Sesame Street. By the way, I watched a lot of Sesame Street, and ironically enough, I watched a lot of Sesame Street as a kid, but it was called Plaza Sésamo because Spanish was my first language. I actually didn't learn English until kindergarten. And so I watched a lot of Plaza Sésamo, which is the Spanish version of it. And then I watched a lot of Sesame Street as I was learning English, which was incredibly helpful. But the piece there is the try piece, but it's the fail piece. And, if you hand an iPhone to a 3-year-old and you hand an iPhone to a 50-year-old, odds are the 3-year-old will end up knowing how to use the iPhone far faster than the 50-year-old. And you could probably see it in your own kids, right? If they have iPads and stuff like that. But the only distinction between that is this ability and willingness to fail. So small children are okay with failure. They have not been jaded yet or taught that failure is bad. And so therefore they're willing to, hit every button on the iPhone, even if it locks it or does something bad. Whereas as adults, as we're taught, failure is actually viewed as a negative thing. And so as you manage a business and you're saying, how do I grow this business? The number one key to growing a business is your willingness to fail. Because if you're not trying novel things and pushing the envelope, if you're doing those things, you're going to fail. There's things that will not work. And accepting that that's an okay outcome, as long as you've learned from that failure and, don't do it again, don't make the same mistake twice, is critical. And I will tell you, one of the things that I have found as I've progressed in my career is senior executives are pretty scared of failure, because as you gain more responsibility, you have more people that you're responsible for. And so there's almost like this adverse, thinking relative to failure. And it's why businesses become stagnant. Because if you're doing what everybody else is doing, if you're copying somebody else, if you're unwilling to take what I call calculated risks or shots on goal, you're not going to be growing the business.
Absolutely. And I think that's a comfort area, right? It's safe to do what everyone else is doing. No one's going to call you out on it. But to step on that ledge, it's hard to do. Absolutely. I want to jump to 2018, I believe it was. So, because I think this is pivotal for people watching or listening is, you're entering a new industry, or maybe it might not be a new industry, but someone's jumping over to a different property, or, they're working for a different company. Kind of talk to that experience, right? You're new. You obviously have leadership credentials, but you're in a new industry. Take us back to that period and kind of just some insights or key learnings from that time period of you coming into the business and your early days at Aristocrat.
Yeah, it's very much like starting a new grade in school. So if you remember, Kyle, when we were little kids and you went, third grade, and then it's the summer break and you're having all this fun time, and then your parents are like, hey, it's time for back to school shopping. It's time to get ready. Everyone has this anxiety-filled moment, right? Where you're like fourth grade, and especially if you're changing schools, because all of a sudden you're thinking to yourself, how am I going to make new friends? Are people going to like me? And you're very cognizant of that. Starting a new job is no different to that. And having that anxious feeling, kind of the butterfly in your stomach, if you will, and all of this uncertainty. There's different people in life. I actually really enjoy that feeling, as much as uncomfortable as it is. I've grown to embrace that feeling. And part of it, I think, has to do with the fact I had so much change as growing up and so many different experiences. So I had to embrace that feeling. So I remember when I started at Aristocrat, November of 2018, it was an interesting time because my wife and my two kids stayed back in Orange County because we had made a decision we were not going to move in the middle of a school year. And so I would fly out usually either Monday morning or Sunday night, and I would stay in Vegas till Friday. But the one benefit to that is it gave me the room to focus all of my time and energy on work during the week. Not a sustainable thing over a long term, obviously, but it really gave me, I could work a lot more hours. And it's not just about the time, but I could fully immerse myself in the experience. I will tell you, I've learned, because I've changed industries quite a few times, the number one thing you have to do when you start a job is, and I tell this to people, open a notebook and write down all of your first impressions. Everything that you think about as you're going through the experience. And that's incredibly powerful in the first 3 months, because you have no history that says that's a bad idea, or you have no history that says we've tried that before. And it's incredibly powerful, and you lose that very quickly, because as you start a new role, a new industry, as you start to learn, you start to become part of that equation. So you lose that very quickly. I tell people, write it down. And then the second advice I give them is try not to have an opinion on things in the first 3 months, which is really hard to do, because as humans, we all have opinions. And the reason that's important is because your opinion is not informed enough. And so if you have opinions too quickly, what ends up happening is people discount your ability to, or your willingness to learn what you don't know. And so that's what I did. I had my notebook. I wrote down 20 things in the first 3 months. I didn't have a big opinion in the first 3 months. I really learned the industry. So just like you, Kyle, I learned by seeing, touching, feeling, experiencing. And so I was very fortunate that I was able to go visit customers pretty quickly when I started, and really immerse myself in a casino experience, because I wasn't a big gambler. I wasn't a big casino patron before this role. And so just really spending the time to learn the industry, but not from a PowerPoint presentation, and not from, reading online, but actually going to visiting customers and experiencing what players experience was critical. And then at month 4, when I felt like I had a better informed opinion, I went back to my list. And today I still have that notebook where I go back to that list. And it's this magical thing that happens because you wrote something down and you may have changed your mind later, or you may have a more informed opinion, or that thought that you had is now more fully complete because you've coupled that with the experience. And so as I think about those 20 things on my list, as an organization, we really try to tackle the vast majority of them because they were good ideas. They were not fully formed. They were not fully informed. But it's just one of those things that I wrote down. I'll give you one really simple one that I wrote down. I wrote down, go to a gene culture. We're really an entertainment technology company. We really should, outside of seeing customers, we really should be wearing jeans, right? And that took 18 months to get done. It's not a complex idea, but when you think about what makes our culture today, the fact that we are a gene culture, the fact that we do view ourselves as an entertainment technology company, the fact that, if I'm not going to see customers, I can wear a polo shirt to work, it is something that has driven things in the culture that have made a positive impact. And so I think there is this magic in the newness of things. And if you think about your life and everything you do, every time you do something new, there's always an element of anxiety, but more importantly, there's an element of excitement. And, trying to capture that excitement and capturing it down on paper so you could use that as you progress in the organization or in the industry is incredibly impactful.
You beat me to my question, which was anything that you wrote down that you wanted to share. I like that one. On the same token, though, you don't have to, but is there one that you wrote down and you were like, you look back at it and you're like, man, I was off on that one?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I had when I first joined the organization was, hey, we need to start to move quicker. We need to drive things faster. And what I've learned from this industry is this industry does not move at speed. And there's reasons for that. There's really important reasons for that. Part of that is regulation, right? And regulation does not move at speed like other industries do. And so as I thought of some of these things that were like, hey, we should change this tomorrow, we should try these new things, you then have to layer in this understanding of why things are and why they are not. And so there's certain ideas that I'm like, hey, we should change that tomorrow, that I knew, hey, that's going to probably take us 3 to 5 years because there's regulation around that. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't change it. It just means that we have to accept the barriers that we operate under, and make sure we're thoughtful on how we change certain things.
Absolutely. And then this process of really the first 90 days, just listening and absorbing, was that learned? Or did you kind of experience that as you progressed through your career, as you went from a manager to a director or whatever it may be? Or did you have the insight to know that from the jump, or did you learn that along the way?
No, I definitely learned that along the way. I would say, I would say if you think about all of your education, the vast majority of your education and the vast majority of your childhood, it's all individually based. So you go to school, you take individual tests, you do individual homework. As you get older, you may have a group project here or there, but you always get an individual grade, right? In your report card, it's Kyle Anderson's report card. It isn't anybody else's report card. It's just your report card. And so what you find is, and I found this in my experience, really, really good individual contributors make terrible managers. And early in your career, it's all about individual contribution. And it's usually grounded on a technical skill or technical expertise. And you're rewarded by that. I will tell you, when I was a first-year manager, I was a terrible first-year manager. because I was so used to this individual component of all of this schooling plus early in your career where you're individually graded, and all of a sudden you realize, hey, everyone's super different and human beings are very different from each other, and not everyone's going to be like you. And my first year as a manager, I was like, why can't Bobby work 14 hours like I'm willing to work? And you realize, well, Bobby may not have the same career aspirations as you do, but doesn't mean that you don't need Bobby to be successful. And so I have found in my career very successful individual contributors, people that got promoted very quickly through the individual element of their roles, are terrible first-year managers. And that's okay. And so I had to learn to slow down and be a better listener, and not just listen so I can get my next point across, but be an active listener. I also learned that while I had an opinion on things, I had to be open to changing that opinion, because great leaders are willing to engage in debate and have their opinion change based on data and information and insight. And so I had to learn that, because I was a really, really good individual contributor. I'd done really well in school. I got promoted very quickly, and then I was a terrible first-year manager. And so it's one of those things, right? You gotta, and so I learned that. I said, this is why I kind of learned this concept, is the first 3 months in any new situation, use a piece of paper to write down your opinion, because you don't want to forget it. But be cognizant that it may not be an informed opinion.
Yeah, it builds trust for sure around those around you. And then also too, I love that you hit on the kind of, I get the sense of self-awareness from you, Hector. Like that's a huge key all throughout every story that you're saying here. But one of those resonated with me. It was actually a Michael Jordan story. And it was when he was at UNC, Coach Roy was an assistant coach at the time. And this always resonated with me. He pulled him aside and he was basically complaining. He's like, no one else is doing X. No one else is doing Y. Why are you pushing me or whatever? And he just looked him in the face. He's like, well, do you want to be like everyone else? And I think that's kind of the moment for anyone in their career is everyone has different aspirations. Everyone's career journey is different, as you said. But if you want to kind of hold yourself to a higher standard or want something greater than others have, it's going to take sacrifice. It's going to take work, and not everyone has to do that. And that's okay. So, I think you hit on that. The casino industry now, you've been in it over 4 years, or roughly 4 years. Anything that stood out to you as far as surprises, trends? Now that you're 4 years in, you guys are a very successful company. Just anything on that end?
I will start off with, it is a great business. It really is. And one of the things as a complete outsider was just how highly regulated the business is. Having to be a key license holder in over 300 jurisdictions, the level of scrutiny that goes into getting someone licensed. And so it's funny because I'll talk to my Uber drivers a lot when I take an Uber, and I'll tell them what I do for a living. And they're always like, tell us what time to go play a slot machine. Tell us what casino to go to. Because there's all these beliefs that, people win more at a certain time, or there's all these like kind of superstitions almost, if you will. And so I was quite surprised actually on how regulated it is, because, the only other highly regulated business I had worked in was biotech, and gaming is as regulated as biotech, if not more. So that was a big surprise. But the other big surprise I would say is part of it driven by regulation is there is a lot of copying in this business. And so everyone either takes talent from each other or they copy each other's ideas. And I think one of the things that has led us at Aristocrat to be successful is we've actually looked outside of the industry and said, hey, what are other similar industries? Like you can look at biotech or pharma, highly regulated. What have they done? What's the evolution they've been on? And I've been fortunate to work at them. So, I always tell people I'm not a genius. I'm just a great copier. So I have this ability to take the ideas that I've lived through, whether it's at P&G, whether it's at Amgen, whether it's at WD, and bringing them to the table, to this industry, to the company, and saying, what are the things we need to tweak about this idea, this concept, the strategy, but how do we bring this into gaming? And I feel very fortunate because the other strategies that we have employed is we have about a 60-40 strategy, which is 60% talent from gaming and 40% talent from outside of gaming. because it's really important that gaming is a very unique industry. So you can't, if you try to bring every single idea from outside of gaming and you don't have internal talent that says, hey, you got to think about this, we got to modify that, the idea usually fails. And that strategy has worked really well for us as we've grown and expanded the talent pool, is having this very nice mix between gaming and non-gaming experience, looking at outside industries and trends and seeing what they're doing, and then adjusting the idea so it conforms to the gaming industry and the constraints we live under, whether it's regulation or other things, but not being afraid to copy outside of the industry versus copying just inside of the industry.
100%. You know, that's something I think Peter mentions a lot, as far as like a lot of times the solution's already out there. He shared a video, our GM, and we had this open discussion about the Fast Pass. And there's a great YouTube video if you all want to look at it. It's a whole bunch of Disney stories, but it's basically the evolution of the Fast Pass. And it all started with this guy who was at a ski lift, and he noticed that the queuing system in the line was so efficient. Basically, they had a couples line, if I remember correctly, and then a general line. And they were able to serve both parties and their expectations at the same time. And then he had that idea of, and the Fast Pass was born, and it's evolved and, you know, come and gone. And then another one too, I actually right down on my wall here, and it's Henry Ford. He visited a meat packaging factory before the automobile and noticed how they use the assembly line. And once again, outside of his industry, like, why are we not doing that?
Right.
So I think you could find those kind of stories all over the place. I want to touch on something that, you know, I kind of nerded out a little bit, and having the CEO of Aristocrat here, I thought I would ask, you know, and that is I would say from like 2016, 2015, all the way through maybe 2019. One of the hot topics, and still a topic in gaming, is just like the evolution of product and the thought of, well, millennials are not going to play slot machines, right? I don't want to comment on what we've seen in Yamava or anything like that, but I just want to know kind of your take on that conversation, and as it relates to just the development of slot product and that case, as far as, is that true, as far as younger generations not liking slot product, or, you know, was that assumption a little off as far as saying, well, they need to be like arcade style video games because that's what they're accustomed to. And then one can make the argument, well, they're at home playing it and it's a totally different experience. So take it where you want, but I'm just curious your thought as it relates to the evolution of thought product and appealing to younger generations.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I remember, Kyle, when I started, I always asked, what are the 3 greatest challenges facing this industry? And one of those was declining foot traffic and the aging population. And this concept that, you know, can we get millennials into a casino? And then as the industry struggled with doing that, they convinced themselves that millennials didn't have any money, and therefore it wasn't worth getting millennials into a casino because they didn't have any money. And again, you look at outside industries, right? Like if you look at automobile, for example, the Camry is a great story. Your parent probably drove a Camry out there, but as a child, as a kid, as a teenager, you're like, I never want to drive a Camry. Like that's such a, you know, it's such an old person automobile. And then, you know, Toyota also created a luxury version of that, right? And so they have the Lexus. And then they realized they had a pipeline problem because they couldn't get younger kids into a Camry. It was too big of a stretch. No one in their 20s wants to drive a Camry. It's just not cool to drive a Camry. And so they created a different brand, the Scion. And they would put the Scion near a Toyota dealership, but they completely different brand. They also changed the way you would show up to a Scion dealership. There was no negotiating. The price was the price. So they removed all of that friction. And ultimately what they said was they're creating a pipeline to eventually take a consumer that wants to drive a cool looking Scion, eventually being comfortable driving Camry, and eventually being comfortable with driving a Lexus. And it's no different in our business as well. I don't think, I used to play video games when I was a kid, and I used to play video games in college. I don't play video games anymore, right? Because your life evolves and you evolve, and part of it is time constraints. And so I think as an industry, we just need to figure out what are the experiences that different segments of the population, whether it be age, whether it be ethnicity, What are the experiences that they're looking for, they're longing for, they're missing? And how do you create that experience on a casino floor? COVID really taught us that, because when the world shut down and things started to reopen, and especially a good example in California, because the COVID restrictions were so strict there, the only things that were open were casinos, right? And a lot of new consumers, whether it's millennials or other types of consumers, started to experience what a casino experience would feel like, to go to. And I'm sure as an operator, you realize that there were certain things that you had to change or modify to make sure that consumer base had the right experience on the casino floor. And you can't look at a millennial and say, hey, I'm gonna encourage them to be a slot player. It's an evolution, right? You got to give them the amenities. You got to give them the experience that, one day they may become a slot player, or they may not be, and that's okay. And so as we've looked at the business through the pandemic and through the recovery, there definitely has been a change of demographics. And part of that is casinos have adjusted to give that experience to a different set of consumers. Just like Toyota said, by the way, the Scion's made on the same assembly line. Like, it's just going to look a little different because the experience that a 22-year-old is looking for is not the most reliable car in the world. They're looking for the cool car. And so I think in any industry, and ours is no different than that, it's really understanding what a consumer wants, what kind of experience they're looking for, and then delivering that experience better than anybody else.
Absolutely. And I like that you hit on kind of accessibility. Us as casino operators have to make it more accessible through, a lot of properties still don't allow certain camera, and they're so strict as far as accessibility on the social front. Well, that's where not even just millennials, most people are living on their phone, so to make it more accessible, whether that's influencers, whether that's just user engagement, then obviously the amenities at the property. But to your point, I think a lot of people experience the casino in ways that they didn't during the pandemic. And also to your point, people change, people evolve. And to your point, some people might not ever just want to play slots, and that's okay. Yeah. But there's still going to be a big generation that will. And I'm sure Aristocrat and others will make the needed adjustments, but not to just wildly make predictions of it needs to be an arcade style video game because that's what they want. They evolve too. So those kind of drastic predictions sometimes don't, fizzle out, so to speak.
Yeah, I said I would never drive a minivan ever. And then, you have two young kids that swing doors open and keep denting cars, and you have to pay for all these car dents. And then you realize there's a reason the minivan doors open like this, right? So your children don't dent other people's cars. And so, it's one of those things that we're all human. We have millions of years of evolution. Change is very slow. And there was all these predictions through COVID about what was going to happen to gaming, and everything was going to change and the world was going to change. And I kept telling the team, change is always gradual. It never changes overnight. Let's make sure we follow the trends, but let's make sure we don't overreact to the trends. Yeah.
You said team. I want to get to that in a minute as we kind of wrap up here, but where's the casino experience going from, things that you've learned being there 4 years? I'm sure now you have kind of a greater history of just kind of how the products changed at Aristocrat. And then just looking ahead, where do you think we're kind of trending as it relates to that experience?
Yeah, I think the one size fits all experience is something that has changed in other industries. If you look at things, everything in life becomes a comparison to what consumers experience. So if you think of mobile wallet, for example, the industry has to get to a mobile wallet that's similar to Apple Pay, because consumers experience Apple Pay every day of their lives. And until the mobile wallet gets close to an Apple Pay experience, it will be a slow adoption because consumers aren't willing to go through all those friction points. You look at Amazon, right? Amazon changed the way things get delivered to you. I mean, they could get delivered to you now under 4 hours, under a day, under 2 days. And so everything that you experience as a consumer from online standpoint, you're going to compare to an Amazon experience because they've set the bar there. I think when you think about the casino experience and you think about kind of the future, it will come down to these unique experiences. And as a company, one of the things that we decided to do last year is we signed the NFL to an exclusive licensing agreement with us, so we could bring NFL product to a casino floor. And 4 or 5 years ago, we would have never done that because one, the NFL had not embraced gaming like it has now. Two, there has been this belief, and it's actually played out, that sports themed slot games have not worked. And so if you've been in the industry a long time, you would never sign a sports brand because it just hasn't worked. Sometimes not having that history or experience allows you to take a little bit more risk because you don't have those battle scars, right? Hey, I took that risk 10 years ago and it didn't work out. I'm never going to take that risk again. And so when we thought about the NFL and we thought about where things were headed, one of the things that has grown very rapidly in the US and really around the world is sports betting. Sports betting has become a very big segment of gaming. It just hasn't been a profitable one. And so you think about all the investments that sports betting companies are making, and you think about, at the end of the day, at some point, no matter what business you're in, you have to be profitable. We said, well, we can take this very global, unique brand, the NFL, which most people know about, and we could bring a slot game, and we can create a whole experience. Instead of just making one slot game, we're gonna make several types of slot games. And as casinos open up sports books, we could potentially build an NFL room, near a sports book. So when a player or patrons at a casino and they've wagered on whatever their favorite sports franchise is, they can then turn around and have a whole experience of the NFL right there on the floor. The other thing we said was the old way of doing things, which was pick a game. And so you, Kyle, will get the Raiders game on the floor. We said that's not enough because 40% of NFL fans are displaced. And so you may live in LA, but you may actually not, be a Rams fan. You may be a Titans fan. So the other thing we challenged the team was, can you create a games where you walk up to the game and you can personalize which team you want? That is an immense amount of complexity. And on a face value, most companies say that's too much risk. That's really 32 unique games, right? But we challenged ourselves to say, well, if we really believe this can work, this is what we have to do to make it work. And so I think that the casino of the future, whatever that looks like, will all be tailored around an experience, versus your traditional, I go there, I eat at the buffet, this very what casinos kind of used to be known for. I think as much as we can personalize experience for players, as much as we can make it unique, as much as we can offer them brands that they're familiar with, that they experience in other parts of their life, players will continue to come, because it really is, a unique experience. When you walk into Yamava, it's not just about gaming. There's so many unique experiences that you can walk and you can have as you walk in the doors. And I will tell you, every time I come visit you guys and visit Peter, no matter what day of the week, there's always a line, right? And so you, as an operator, have figured out what is that unique experience that continues to attract these players.
Yes, absolutely. Hector, there's so many nuggets you've provided today. I kind of got some final questions here for you. I wanted you to be able to speak about, and maybe they're the same, but what contributes to the success of Aristocrat as far as from the customer guest experience standpoint? You've kind of hit on it. I love the intellectual property opportunities working with the NFL, the immersive experiences you spoke about, but kind of what makes Aristocrat different as it relates to just kind of the experience end for the end consumer, but then also part two, and just as important, if not more important, what makes Aristocrat different from the culture team member standpoint?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that obviously COVID was a very tough period for all of us, but there was a couple of positive things that came out of that. And through economic, shocks in the world, through tough times, companies that continue to innovate, companies that continue to take on some level of risk usually tend to jump ahead for everybody else. One of the things we discovered through COVID was it was really all about our people. And we came up with this mantra: our people, our customer, our business, and in that order. And we went out and told customers that, hey, our people are number one. So we won't put our people in danger from a COVID perspective, just to service you. And we were very clear about that. And we were very clear internally with our employees that they came first. And one of the things that we have found is we've unlocked, and that's so simple, right? Our people, our customers, our business. That's so simple. But we've unlocked this magical moment from a cultural perspective that everyone, because they see how the company has prioritized them as individuals, as their families, they then turn around and prioritize our customers. And so when a service tech shows up, when a sales rep shows up, when anybody shows up to a property, they show up, excited, passionate, wanting to serve, wanting to solve the problem, because internally within our four walls, we've done that for them. And so it's this magical thing that's happened where our people are really happy to work here. It's transcended much more than a job. And they show up to customers and they have that same level of passion and engagement. And from a business standpoint, we actually spend very little time talking about numbers because the business has performed at such a high level because we've gotten the first two things right. And you'll hear a lot of companies talk about that. Very few companies actually do it. And one gauge of that is, I always say this, going to the manufacturing site and talking to the folks that work on the line. Can they repeat your strategy? And can they repeat what the company stands for? And if the answer is no to either of those questions, you as a leader are not doing a good job, because it's not good enough if only 5% of the company can repeat your strategy and what you stand for. And if you go to our manufacturing lines anywhere where we have a manufacturing facility, they can do that because we made it very simple and we were very consistent and we haven't changed it. So that's the other thing too is, at the end of the day, having a good strategy is really important, but relentless execution is far more critical than the strategy. You have to have relentless execution every day. The other thing I will tell you from a team perspective is, I was talking to my wife a little bit about this morning, actually. As a leader, because of life is really all about individual contribution early on, you feel like you have to know everything all the time because you take a test by yourself. You can't ask for help. And as you mature in the organization, you get to higher levels, you realize there is no way I could possibly know everything. It's impossible. There's not enough hours in the day to know everything. And so you learn you have to rely on other people. And then the other thing you learn is that your weaknesses will never be your strengths. Your weaknesses just can't be career derailers. That's all everyone should ever work on. Your weaknesses just shouldn't be career derailers. They will never be your strengths. And then building a team around you that fills all of your weaknesses. And that basically takes a lot of humility, because it takes your willingness to share with your team the things that you are not good at, right? And being very open and transparent. I talk about that to my team all the time. Hey, these are the things I am not good at. Therefore, I need you to make sure you're covering the gaps. And there's an element of humility that has to happen there. There's also an element that no one individual is greater than the greater good of the total. So any company that is reliant on one or two or three or four or five people over time will fail. Great leaders make it so when they leave an organization, they're not missed at all, because they've built this foundation that the organization can continue to survive without you. And I look at my personal life a lot, because I feel like that in my personal life as well. I have two kids. I have an almost 15-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old son. As a parent, you're trying to teach them to be able to be good adults when you're not around, make the right decisions when you're not there to punish them if they make the wrong decisions. And it's the same things. There's so many parallels in professional life and your personal life, right? And I personally feel that when I became a parent, I was also not a great parent. Like, I don't, all those first time things, right? Like, there's no handbook, and every kid is so different. I learned a lot as I was progressing my career when I was parenting and the things that didn't work, and when I was trying to be a manager and the things that didn't work. Because inevitably, no one solution works for, if you have more than one kid, no one solution works for both of them. It's a very individualized approach.
100%. And I think that's something everyone could take to everything that you've said today, but also that thought of, almost like double down on your strengths, understand what your weaknesses are, and from a resource allocation standpoint, hire to fill those gaps. And man, if you can understand that earlier, you're going to be better off. And it's amazing how many people miss that in interviews. You're going to get that question one way or the other. What's your weakness, right? Or tell me something setback, where all people want to see is, do you have humility? Do you have a little bit of self-awareness? That way, one, it shows that humility, which people can work with you, which is good. And then two, as the hiring person, you understand, okay, these are the areas that because you're right, no one's 100% perfect. And man, it's amazing how many people mess up that question.
Yeah. And I think, again, it's because you're as an individual, kind of through schooling, you're taught so much that it's all on you. You got to solve it all yourself. It's been a humbling experience too, even having a high schooler now, because we had this conversation around grades with her, and she came to us and said, "Hey, I'm not going to be able to get an A in every subject." And I said, "Why not? You can. You have the resources. We can get you a tutor. We can, it's just time." And you have this aha moment as a parent when you're like, you know what? She has a lot of self-awareness at this young age to know, hey, geometry is probably, she's a freshman in her toughest class. Getting a B+ in geometry will be totally fine. It's not going to impact her life whatsoever. And so even having kids allows you to have that realization, like, hey, getting a B or getting a B+, like, that doesn't actually derail anything. And everything's going to be just fine. Yep,
100%. Hector, I appreciate you spending some time. I'm going to get you out on some rapid fire questions here. Morning habit that helps guide your day.
Yeah, every morning I wake up and I think about the 4,000 plus families that I could potentially have a positive or a negative impact in the decisions that I make for that day. I always start with that.
Wow, absolutely. That perspective, I'm sure, helps a lot. Number two, favorite TV show right now?
Oh, I just finished Ozarks, which was fascinating because I actually started watching Ozarks when I started the job at Aristocrat, and I started the whole licensing experience. And it was just interesting to start my career right when Ozarks went on, and then, to finally watch the last episode a couple of nights ago.
Okay, that's a good one. I made it through, I think, season 2, and then I stopped, but I got to pick it up because people are telling me to finish it through.
It's good.
Favorite thing to do outside of work?
Hang out with my family. I think a lot of people, in order to be really successful, you need to prioritize. The most important thing is to say no and how you allocate your time. For me, work is obviously very important. I'm very passionate about what I do, but my family is more important. So I prioritize them.
That's a good one. And is there a quote that you like to use a lot, or one that resonates with you?
Yeah, only the paranoid survive, by Andy Grove. No matter how successful you are today, no matter if you're the market leader, there's always someone hunting for you. So every single morning, you got to wake up and earn it.
Love it. And then this is the final question. 3 things that someone could do, anybody could start doing right now to take their career to the next level.
Define the outcome. Seek others that have been there or on track to get there. And then be open to change.
And you hit on that throughout our conversation today and gave us much more. So Hector, I just want to take a second to thank you. I know you're busy. Your morning practice kind of shows, the responsibility that you have to take the time. Just know it means a lot. And, I hope everybody found this valuable. So Hector, thanks for joining the show today.
No, appreciate it, Kyle. Thank you.
Check out more episodes on nextlevelcasinocareers.com.